Hey, thank you for taking the time to click on today's video. We're going to be talking about second marriage mistakes. And I'm not here to say that your second marriage is a mistake. I'll leave that one up to you. But we're going to be talking about the mistakes that I see happen more than I would care to admit to as a fiduciary. And we've got our couple here. We've got Phil, we've got Betty, and then of course we see that Phil and Betty have their own little passel of kids. And we're going to be talking about what's going to happen after death. So this happens to be a couple that I met with recently. And this is what kind of spurned this video, because if I can help provide a little bit of a public service announcement, maybe you can avoid making this very simple and yet very devastating effect. So Phil and Betty, they had been married. This is a second marriage for both of them. They were very happily married. They'd been married for about 15 years. And as I was going through and asking questions about their family dynamics, I asked the question, what happens when both of you die? What do you want to have happen to your assets? Now, the obvious answer that usually comes up is that, well, I want my kids to get my stuff and I want my kids to get my stuff. And that sounds fair, right? But here was the problem. The problem is that all of us, over the course of time, we tend to collect all sorts of things that we've saved for retirement. It could be 401ks, it could be IRAs, it could be Roth accounts, it could be brokerage accounts and annuities and life insurance. We've got all of these different types of assets, but there's one common theme behind all those different things, and that's the fact that they all maintain beneficiary designations. Now, beneficiary designations are important, and they're nothing to sneeze at, because beneficiary designations actually supersede your will. Now, what does that mean? Well, in Phil and Betty's case, what it meant was they had brought along their estate plan. As I was going through their estate plan, they had the typical fill-in-the-blank will. And each of them had basically decided that they wanted separate wills, and they wanted those separate wills to include assets going to their kids after their death. But the problem is that there was no cohesive alignment with the rest of their retirement. All of their annuities and their life insurance policies and their brokerage accounts, even Phil's 401k, was listing Betty as the primary beneficiary. Now I want you to think about that for just a moment. If beneficiary designations supersede your will, that means that when you die, it doesn't matter what your will says. In fact, there's a Supreme Court case from years ago where a couple had been divorced long, long ago, and yet he had forgotten to change the primary beneficiary, no longer to read his now ex-wife, but it was still reading her. And even though they had been divorced for well over a decade, he passes away, and guess what? The Supreme Court ruled that she got 100% of his retirement accounts. Now that doesn't seem fair, but it doesn't matter what we think. It's what the law says. So in this particular case, Phil said, well, if I die, I want my assets to go to my children. Betty said, if I die, I want my assets to go to the children. But yet their beneficiaries were reading each other as primary beneficiaries, with the children being listed as contingents. So let me show you what then happens. And it's pretty simple. What happens is, all of a sudden, we now have Phil, and Phil has passed away. Phil is no longer in the picture. He's been run over by the big yellow bus or whatever. He's died. And all of his beneficiaries, including his tax-free life insurance, says that everything is to go to Betty. And that's what happens. Now, I want you to think through this. What then happens when Betty dies? If you said that all of the money then conveys down to her kids, you would be absolutely correct. And so what does that leave us? That leaves us with 3 children over here that got absolutely nothing. That completely went against everything that Phil wanted. Yes, he wanted to take care of Betty. Yes, he loved Betty. He wanted to make certain she was okay. But ultimately, he didn't want to just completely excommunicate his children. He didn't want to leave them inheritless. He wanted to make certain that they got something. And so this is a mistake that I see way too often. We have to think forward, and we have to think about what's going to happen with our money, what's going to happen with our accounts when we pass away. So the first thing that we did in Phil and Betty's case was that we went back and we redesigned all of the beneficiary designations. You see, when you've been married a second time, if you want your children to receive money, you want them to receive assets, you want them to receive anything that you have, if it's in a beneficiary-driven account, you have to list these children not as a contingent, but as a primary beneficiary. Now, when I brought this to their attention, immediately, Betty said, well, that's okay, Matthew, because I'll just go ahead and I will give his kids money. That would be the only right thing to do. The problem is that I see most of the time that never happens, and here's why. It's not because Betty is facetious or Betty doesn't really care about his kids. It's the fact that Betty is going to absolutely get hammered with taxes. You see, the bulk of the retirement that Phil had was all pre-tax money. So is she going to go ahead and receive $500,000 of pre-tax money, and is she going to go ahead and cash out $300,000 and pay taxes on $300,000 and then give that money after she's paid the taxes to the kids? It's not very practical. It doesn't make sense. Most of the time, once they realize that they're facing this huge tax liability, they go, I really want to give you something, but I'm sorry, I don't have the stomach for that. So simple as it may sound, instead of taking and making Betty the primary beneficiary, we made Betty a 1/4 beneficiary and primary beneficiary with the other 3 kids as 1/4 primary beneficiaries as well. Now you see why it is so very important to pay attention not simply just to what you want, but making certain that everything that you've invested your money in, all of your different accounts, are cohesively aligned with what you want, so that you're able to make certain that the money that you've worked so hard to save actually gets to those that you love. Well, I hope this video has been helpful to you. If you like this video, I sure do appreciate you giving us a thumbs up. Share this with your friends, especially those that maybe are on their second or third marriage. And you know what? If you like our little videos, hit the subscribe button down there and the little bell. We will notify you each and every time we have a video. Thanks so much for watching, and remember, it's up to you to make today a great day.